Sign Adar Rishon, Hatopshin Samech Hemshech Samech Vav, page Kuf Nun Aleph.
So we were holding by the comparison of the Oifen HaYagia, which leads to Riyah de Chochmah, compared to the Oifen of Yagia, Avedis Ha'odam Ba'atzmei, which leads him to the Gila, the Avarabba, Milmaila, that was mentioned in previous Drushim here in the Emsha. So we saw the difference in Riyah de Chochmah, even though BMS, that's also a Giloi, which comes, as we saw, Milmaila. It's not that the Odom reaches BMS, Alidei Avidosei, who to the Etzem Madrega of Riyah de Chochmah. However, we saw that the Yagia is in a Seder, Masuda, in the union of Avedis HaMoyach until such a point that through higher madregas in Hasoga, such as Yedias HaShlila and things of that similar to that in the Oifane Aveda Hasoga, then it's possible for him to reach through a Matana Milmaila, albeit the union from Riyah de Chochmah. But Ilu we saw in Aveda Avarabba that it's only a preparation of what you might call the ground over there. That he reaches a certain madrega in his Yagia in Avayira, in Aveda Satfila, and Beklal Aveda, and that sets a certain ground, what you might call a certain order of Shleimus in his Aveda Avayira, that Ali Day said can be Yered Milmaila, and there's like a fruitful ground in which it can be Yered Milmaila de Avarabba, which Be'etzim comes Milmaila. Not that has a direct shaykhis to the inyonim which he was oisik in them. Ve'ilu, we saw Riyah de Chochmah, it's mamish in those inyonim for Hasoga, and then Lamaila me Hasoga, like we saw Yedias HaShlila, which is Be'etzem Lamaila from the normal Oifanim of Hasoga, and so through different dragas in Hasoga, he reaches a Re'iyah in the Hasoga Gufa, a deeper and more profound experience of the Giluyim which can occur in Amoyach, in the Inan Amoyach, but that's Chochmah. So Emes, or that Shleimus of that Riyah is given. But Milmaila, we saw even Piseimi, it can come in a Gilu to the Adam after he's put in all of his effort in Sogas HaShlila. However, it does have a certain shaykhs and a certain what you might call continuality of the aliyah of the seichel into the experience of the re'iyah, what we call ein haseichel, the eye of the seichel. Well, that all tends to indicate that it's within the same general realm of the Yagias Ha'odam B'sichlei. Avarabba, however, we saw was Inyan not compared or not b'shayches to the types of his bonus which had brought him the Avayira in Avidose Betfila or Beklolis Avidose. No, it was purely a gift Milmaila to those who have struggled and made the effort as much as they can. And we compared that to the union like we see in Shvuas, that we are zecher on Shvuas night after the whole Avedis Hasfira to the Matan Torah, and that's the Sharanun, and in Sharanun Gufa, the 50th gateway of Bina, and in that itself, it's a very high and pneumistic level, and the Alter Rebbe brings in Chutei Bariches, in certain Maimonim over there, that's a Matana Milmaila, where Zeicha, after we prepared the whole ground of Bir HaNefesh HaBahamius Alidei the Sfiras HaOimo, which is well known. That's the union from Bir HaMidas of the Nefesh HaBahamius, and having been Mevatel those Midas and brought them to a Beetle in the Midas to Kedusha, it's then possible for such a high Gilui of Matan Torah to rest within, as would be Yored and Miskale in the Neshama of the Adar. Oh, it's not the case that he really reaches that level, or he reaches the type of level which is given in the Pinimis of the Shara Nun, the Leil Shuaz. It's a form of a gift, but if he hadn't done everything that he had to do, then he wouldn't have had that his gallows. It wouldn't have been tried to give him. And that's what the Gemara says in Baba Basha, that a person only gives a matona to somebody who does him a nachas ruach. If somebody's already done something that causes a nachas ruach to the noisein, then he gives him a matona, which means that a matona is really something completely shalei be'era. It's not that the Adam earned the matona, but if he hadn't done a certain nachas ruach to the giver of the matona, then he wouldn't have got the matona melachatchila. The same way, Avarabba is a matana, but if we hadn't made a preparation and done everything we could within our koiches, then Ein Nochanam the Abish wouldn't have given the gila of the Avarabba. And the same with the Inim from Leil Shavuos, the giving of the Torah, Leil Matan Torah, it's the same Inya. Very similar Inim, Kamavu and those Drushim in Lakuti Torah. At great length. However, the Indian of Riyah Dechach was another idea. There we reach mamish into the possibility that can then be given to him in a direct way. Not that we're just preparing the ground or causing an achas ruach, but we actually reach into the higher forms of asoga, which are b'yemes l'mayla mi asoga. Dainu asoga sashlila. I'm talking about the yonim which are b'yemes l'mayla mi derech harogil in asoga, and from that we move, or the Adam is able to move into these galus of the madrega, what you might call b'derech shleimas, riyah, well that's the from riyah's ein haseichel. So that was basically what we reached, or that conclusion. And earlier we said that how the Indian from Riyah the Chokmah brings to the emissary Indian of Vedas Hashoyiv as compared to the Indian Arotzoi. We said it was a Gila Milmaila, and we developed on that whole Indian how that doesn't negate the fact that it's also due to his Avodah. And both things are true. But now we start after the brackets about almost half of the way down the page, a bit less than halfway. V'hinei kol zeh hu mi shehigia l'mayla u'madrega zu d'bchinas Riyah d'chok. The whole discussion ad koi has been about somebody that he reaches the Indian from Riyah d'chok, and he reached that mayla and that madrega of Riyah d'chok, and he reached it through his own yagia. V'liyah is b'pchina shoiv, and then that brings him to the madrega nailis b'yesa or the Indian of shoiv, because it's megala him milmaila the kavana amiti, like we saw that it's a gila el milmaila. Avo misha lo higia dain l'madrega zu. What about something that he doesn't have Riyah d'chokma, and he didn't reach Adayin? Adayin means for the time being, meaning that we assume he will reach that madrega. But that's just, by the way, the Chassidus never says somebody who didn't reach this madrega, but that would imply that maybe he's never going to reach it. Therefore, we just say Misha Dayin loy. This is somebody who didn't, for the time being, reach that madrega. Hari Ashuv, the Indian from Shuv, by him, Mashem Ischazik Petero Mitzvahs, what he strengthens himself and he takes on extra koyach and extra commitment. Petero Mitzvahs Besur Mira Ve'asei Tei, by turning away from evil, that's in Mitzvahs Leisaseh. Ve'asei Tei, that's in the Indian from Mitzvahs Aseh. Hu Be'esek HaTorah Kol Hayoim, and with the busying himself with learning Torah the whole day. That doesn't mean to say that he's a kernel Yingaman when he sits the whole day and learns. But that means whenever he has an opportunity, he devotes his time to learning. That is for sure. In other words, that with the Indian from Riyah, we saw that the Shoiv is on a higher madrega, which comes from the very Gilui Milmaila that the Shoiv is. And that Gilui that the union for Riyah de Chochma is, I'm sorry. And that Riyah de Chochma shows him the union of Shoiv. It shows him where to go. So that's on a higher madrega. Somebody who doesn't have the level of Riyah de Chochma, then he's devoting himself to Torah mitzvahs in such a committed way that he's Isaac B'Torah Kol HaYom, and he's Isaac and he's Mischazik, he's all the time strengthening his Torah mitzvahs, both in Lois Aseh and in Aseh. So that Sur Mirav Aseh Tov doesn't just mean the actual listed mitzvahs in the Torah of Sur Mirav. Aseh Tov, it means even in delicate matters, the things which are like it's called, we find the expression sometimes in the Gemara, Ovach Loshen Hora, not Mamish Loshen Hora, but it's like the dust of Loshen Hora. It's not Mamish, but it's getting pretty close to it. And we find such things that our sages give certain names to delicate Isurim, which are not Mamish the Etzem Lois Aseh, Kamosh Kosim Batoira, but how they call it in Yiddish, they schmecken from them, they smell from it, they got traces of it. So you have to be very careful in what's called dachus hara. In delicate matters of evil and improper inyonim, you have to turn away from them. So that's the union of sur mirah. It doesn't just mean pure mitzvah leis aseh. And the same with aseh toiv, doing good things can include all sorts of inyonim that you're not necessarily mechuyev in. Oisa harega, but mitzad avos chavedim and avos Yisrael, or mitzad other inyonim you desire, and you go out of your way to be busy your goof with doing good and positive and what you might call things which build rather than cholila bring to the opposite. Well, that's the inyan of Sumirava Seitei. And Eisa Katoira there also means being busy with the inyan for learning Torah, not only learning yourself but helping others to learn. Kolayeh. So he said, Be'ikeh, that's Bekoyach Atzmai. If you don't have the Riyah de Chochma, what the Riyah de Chochma brings you a Gilui Momaila and shows you where it should be the Yinif and Shoiv, then for you to reach that level just described, then that's your own koyach. You devote yourself and you give yourself away. We'll soon use the expression here in Kabbalah's Oil, Malchus Shemayu. V'hagam shemoyel bezeh harashimo anisheres mi'ahav v'yira shebetfila. And even though it's not purely just what you might call only his koyach atzmai, only the effort that he makes to be devoted to Sumirav Asayitei, but there's also an assistance. Moyil means it's beneficial and it helps in this matter the trace that's left over from the Av of a year that he felt in Avodas Tefillah. Mishum zehu Sumirav Asayitei kol ayim. It's much in certain places that even because of that, because of the Ava year that left over after davening, that you could be Sumirav Asayitei kol ayim. And that's what the Alter brings in Tanya Perikud Base, when they get to the Beinoni. He says that the Beinoni after the davening, to a certain extent, loses, in inverted commas, the tremendous Av of a year that he had b'shas the actual davening. Mashen Kana Tzadik never loses it. By Tzadik the Av of a year Ameya Etzloi Yabli Hefsek Klau. Just when he davens there, who knows Ad Shemayim Ravim. But he never has any hefsek in the Av of a year. After the davening, the Alter Rebbe says over there that Choylefes v'Ivedes the Av that he had b'shas Tefillah. However, he writes at the end of Perikud Beis over there that a Rishima mi Av v'Yir Zu nishar al kola. That there remains a Rishima, that's what they're referring to here, as a trace of the tremendous awakening of fear of the Eibishter and love of the Eibishter that he had, but Shas Tefillah, and it's over there. The Alter Rebbe writes that gives him the ability, because Rabbeinu can't be nixal, he can't fall into a even Ha'isa D'Rabbanan, called Hayom Kulei, so that assists him and helps him in his fight never to fail, never to fall into the hands of the Yetzer Hara, afilu be'isishu dover kotem ma'id. Therefore, what helps him is the Rishima from the Av V'yira Kol HaYom. So the Rebbe said, that it's not just purely his own effort the whole day, but there's a certain trace which is left from the Av V'yira that he had B'tfilah. So the answer to that is quite obvious. But what brought him the Av V'yira was once again his own effort. If he hadn't worked hard, then he wouldn't have Av V'yira B'shas HaTfilah. Hine, said the Rebbe, Levad zois, shagam ha'av v'yira shebetfilah hi avidos v'yagiyose. He said the truth is that av v'yira, which he now feels the effect, kol hayom, is also alidei avidose v'yagi. Also, Canal in the previous Maimonim writes about that. If you hadn't struggled hard, you don't have av v'yira. You don't just give a knip with your fingers and then all of a sudden you have Av V'yira. That comes also through a Ribui Avida. Mamela said to Rebbe, L'chora, we can answer that that's the reason why he is committed the whole day. So the Rebbe said, Emes, that's true, but he said apart from that, in addition to that, Inei Masha Lo Yimotze Lo Yimto Noi Chaim L'nafshei. That we can find that he will never be able to rest. In other words, that somebody who's making an emissary effort to reach the tachlis of the Eibishter's Kavanah in the Shoiv is a person that he never able to rest. Noicheim is from the word manucha, or it's also from the word nichoma, which means comfort, as to say, like reassurance or comfort. So he said a person devoted to Torah mitzvahs is never able to be comfort with himself. He's never able to be satisfied. He's always looking for more. He wants to add in his Torah mitzvahs b'chol hazman. So he said, Masha lo yimtza noichein lanafshay p'li ha'isek ha'toira v'kiyum ha'mitzvahs kol ha'yom kamosh yizboyer. We're going to talk about that more as we go along. Or Masha mishchazek, and what he adds all the time, kol ha'yom. He not just does Torah mitzvahs, but he's looking for further strength and further koyach. Kol hayom b'kiyum ha'Torah mitzvahs, ein ze mitzad ha'rishima hanal. It's not mitzad the trace that's left from the Av V'yira. So the truth of the matter is that there is an effect of the Av V'yira, and also that's not necessarily a kasha of Yagir, because he didn't get the Av V'yira without Yagir. But that's not what we mean here. When we say that the Shoiv of a mensch when he's coming the Shoiv Amiti, then that's not necessarily through the Rishima which is left over, nor is a mamish another effort and another Aveda on his part. Because we see that it's not just purely mitzad that Rishima. As if it was just mitzad that Rishima from the davening, the Av V'yira, then he would do Torah mitzvahs. He would be busy with Torah mitzvahs. He'd be careful with Torah mitzvahs. Kol hayom kulei emes. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya B'negeh to the Beinani. That's enough to, as it were, hold you and keep you carefully guarded. Kol hayom. But he said, well, we see a Siddish Yid, an devoted person to Torah mitzvahs, then we see that he's not able to rest he's all the time looking for further achievements. He wants to add more into it, and he's never comfortable without some inyan in Torah or in the mitzvahs. And we'll talk more about that. In addition, he's all the time struggling to be mishchazik, to strengthen himself and to do more. The kiyum Torah mitzvahs. Then he said that aspect of the shoiv, that's not mitzad the Rishima that came from the davening. Kiyim mitzad atzmoi, that is only because of his own special effort. V'hainu mitzad kabbalas el malchus shamayim sheboi. What he has a special taking on the yoke of heaven within himself, and in Yiddish was is be'etzim aveki geben zu elokus. He's in himself, in his essence, aveki geben, he is given over and devoted to elokus. Weggegeben means you're completely given away or devoted to divinity. In other words, that an emes shoiv, what you might call an emes shoivnik, is not just somebody that he's all the time careful about his Torah mitzvah, but he's devoted entirely to Elokus. Now that means to be devoted entirely to Elokus means that wherever you find anything that could be Shach Elokus, then you want to be there. In other words, you want to have a part in it and an effort in it. And anything that might say, oh yeah, that's for sure, a thing that the Eibishter would want, even though I'm not necessarily mechuyev b'zeh, then he will want that because he's completely given over to Elokus. Mishum zeh lo tanuach nafshay. It's because of that he can't find any rest or comfort within himself, because he's completely given over to Elokus. Kiyim ba'avidose b'finas avidas eved kol hayom. He can't find any, as it were, satisfaction or rest within himself. He can only be satisfied when he gives himself away ba'avidas eved kol hayom. In other words, he gives himself away to be just like a simple eved, b'kiyum ha'torah mitzvahs, b'finas shoiv davke u'mishchazik b'zeh. And he's all the time getting stronger b'finas b'toikev godel mitama anha. And my mother said that's the emes inyan from shoiv. Now here we see l'chora two inyanim which are, when you think about them, are almost hafochim zeh mizeh. Because our eved is l'chora a man, but he doesn't have any inyanim of his own. He seems to be a broken kli. He's like a broken vessel, and the Odin just uses him and stups him around. Just tells him to do this and pushes him to do that. He doesn't really have any greater, position by himself or in the eyes of the world. An Eved is a very, what you might call, cast down type of concept, it would appear. So we say, no, Dafkin, when he reaches that level of Avidas Eved, then he's mishchazik, b'tuikev godel, he's got this tremendous brand to add into his Torah mitzvahs and to be mishchazik kol hayom, and that's the same and the same question comes with the concept of Kabbalah Seil. Kabbalah Seil means you take on yourself a yoke and just give yourself away to it. L'chera b'li chayes miyuchad. You say, but I have to do it, I got to take on myself the yoke. Why would we say that Dafke that gives him an ability to completely devote himself to Elokus in such a way that he doesn't look anymore at his own position. He's happy to be an Eved, and on the contrary, he goes Michailo Choyo b'mishchazik toikev godel. That a toikev mit a bren, with a starkheit, kol hayom, kol hazman. Amamela, how do those two concepts come together? They're like one against the other. Meila, well, we speak about the person who's got a rashima from Ahava v'yira. Ahava v'yira is a geschmack. Ahava v'yira means time and enthusiasm. That's what Ahava is. And yira also is a bittul with a midah, with a feeling, with a iskashvis, pnimis to the Indian. And well, we say that the whole Avida, like it's written in Tanya, it's at the Rishon, at the Ahava v'yira. I understand that. The Rishon for the Ahava v'yira remains, the enthusiasm and the brand and the koch, the Indian for Ahava remains. If we say no, but there's something deeper than that here, well, that's Kabbalah Seil and self-devotion completely in a form of Avedus Eved, and that brings him to be mishchazeik and to be all the time going, b'teikev, haki godel, it's hatat l'chera almost like Seisa one day Adar. How do they come together? We can understand and mention as an Eved Poshut, particularly we see later on in the Emshik talks about the even an Eved Poshut. After the mentions of Eved Poshut, where does he get this tremendous koyach? I follow more again. Weiter. L'chera, the Gemara says that Avda b'hafkeira nichale. Really, I would like to be free. He doesn't want to have to do all of the, yoke that he's got on himself. So I see it doesn't really bother anybody in particular. Maybe we could go further. It's a fascinating shaila. So it comes back to the basic nakuda which we've met on numerous occasions, and we'll meet it as we go along. And we'll in other places in the Rebbe Nishma Seiden and in Beklal, we find it written Bariches Ava v'yira, and the Roshim which remains over from Ava v'yira. So the mensch has got what you might call something in that for himself, and that's what you might call a fulfilling state. And a mensch can have in that what we call a good taste. He can have gishmak and tuf ta'am, ava telakus. Me lo, who's not going to vote for that? Yira, emes yira, and emes emotional arousal, and koch, and chayis, and bren, v'shas atfila, v'chule. Me lo yagid shezeto. But that's all to a certain extent. The mensch has got his own portion per se, He feels ava, he feels yira, he has gishmak, he has tuf ta'am. What you might call, it's still got certain traces of what you might call a religious experience. What they could talk about in inverted commas, kemuven, where a person, he feels when he hears, and he says this fulfillment, and chaystot mitzvah. However, when we say that you got to be hoyle kol ayom kulin, you got to be in the world, mamish with all that. We're not talking about a person who sits here and koidel the ganze Tag and he hasn't got to do except learn. Like we said, we're talking about people that have to go out into the world. The mensch got to do with the fact that there's a oilam, and nonetheless, even though he goes out into the world, he's hoylech u'muschazik, not just that he holds himself. But it's much more over there in Tanya that we're talking about the bain, and he being a person that he has to guard himself against all forms of temptation, afirahira, v'chule. And he has the avayira, that holds him and it keeps him going. But to be hoylech is chazik the whole time. So therefore, it's exactly opposite of what the world thinks. That the Indian from Kabbalah Sale, Emerson Kabbalah Sale, is not a dry thing. It's not a, I've got to do this, and I have chomish and breder, and do this, to go a yoke around me, I have to do this, I got to do something else. Now, Kabbalah Sale means that he forgets about himself altogether. And he's not interested anymore in his own chaylik bezeh. No, he's devoted towards the wilder Rebishter, and he tries to take on in his life to devote himself to what is the kavanah and what is the emes will of Hashem b'chol inyan shehu. And whatever you might come up, he tries to work out what would the emes want, what is the emes tachlis, and not what would I like and what is enjoyable for me. What do I really have out of this? And what sort of rufnius am I going to gain from this, etc. That's the Indian from Kabbalah Sale. At the same with Emesa Eved is something that he's worried about the Adar. He's concerned that for the Adar, you have to do everything for the sake of the Adar. There's a book that some guy wrote in English. It was an Elachir. He wrote a book called All for the Boss. Did you ever see it? An interesting book. He was talking not a chassid, but he got to some I don't know. My wife has the book at home, so occasionally she shows me these passages for him. There's a book called All for the Boss. But that's what it means, that he came to the conclusion that the whole life is just to worry about the Eibush. Don't worry about it. It's really quite an interesting little book as it comes to a few of these books that are written that are really to the point. I don't mean anything show. Translations and things like that. So that's what it is. Emes Eved he's all for the boss. He's all in is only for the sake of the honor. He doesn't care about himself. If he does, then he's an Eved, like it's written in the Gemara, an Eved b'afkeira nichale. He would really like to stop being an Eved. He'd like to get out of all this. Of our Eved who's devoted to his Adar, And his whole Indian is only the Otzain and the Tuiv of the Odain, and he's immense. On the contrary, he has a brain that's not enough. The Odin is such a remarkable aim in his life that he's got to keep more and more, and he's got to bring more Nachas Ruach and more Inyanim to the Odain. And those are the Inyan and the Eved is heilig mischazik. He wants all the time to better and splendify. He wants to splendify the matchav of his order, and therefore he goes the whole time looking for more and more ways of because he's not concerned about himself. He's forgotten all about his own inyanim, and his whole in is only the emes of kavana of the order. And therefore, a man like that is never really able to rest and put his feet up and just sit back and say, here we are, I've reached a very Gishmach Madrega, and this is great, to light up the spiritual cigar with the whole mass. He's not able to do that. He's all the time struggling and looking for further inyanim. Akamuvan, it takes simcha b'tuv levov, on the contrary, he's heilig mischazik, even of kol hayom, impatience to add and to do more, and that's his whole geschmack. He's not in his own geschmack. So ever the Rebbe comes out that avodah in that way is really a very gegeben zu Elikus. His whole in is man wieder the Eibishter. What can we do more for the boss? In other words, what can we devote ourselves more to the Eibishter, to Gil Elikus, Lefi Rotzen of the Eibishter. And a man like that is, on the contrary, he's a Eved, but he's a Eved B'chola Teik.
We're talking about Eved Nema?
No. Talk about the Eved Posh. Talk more about the Eved Posh. I mean, it could be he's got a little bit of certain traces of the Eved Nema. But in Pashas we're talking about the Eved Posh. Mishum Zeh lo yitanuach nafshei ki'im ba'avidosei b'bchinas avidas Eved b'kiyum ha'Torah mitzvos b'bchinas shei davke o mischazik b'zeh b'teikuv godol mitama. And now, on the contrary, he's about the Eved Poshas, and that's what he talks all the time. He's struggling with new devotion.
Why is there a contradiction between earlier
Contradiction?
Or a question that he's an Eved, but what was the question?
Oh, I can't go back over the whole Shah. If you didn't have the Shah, then you have to ask in the Chazorah. I'm terribly sorry. I went into it in some detail. We have to move forward. We're going to just go back and repeat it all again. So, Mishum Zeh lo yitanuach nafshei b'kiyum ha'Torah mitzvos b'chinas shei davke o mischazik b'zeh b'teikuv godol mitama. And now, sure. So that's like a pause for a moment. And now we're going to start off with a new inyan. And that'll come back and throw a great deal of light on what we just reached this conclusion. And now, having reached this conclusion, here we're talking about the so-called ordinary man, because we're not talking about somebody that's reached Riyah de Chochmah, a dayan lo yagil. Here we're talking in a realm where it's possible to say that everybody can and is mamela expected to reach this type of devotion and this type of commitment. So the Rebbe says like this: that is a beginning of like a new look on the whole thing now. The Hine, first of all, let's examine the Indian how it is Lamaila. We're going to go back now to the Indian from Rotzoi, how it is in its what you might call it Shurish Lamaila. The Hine Lamaila Bechinas Rotzoi Shayach Rach Behoir V'Hagilui Me'ein Tzei Baruch Hu. The Indian of Rotzoi that there should be a desire to go upwards and as it were, you might say, backwards towards the source and to the Shoresh. Well, that's only in such revelations from the Eibishter, which are called Oyer V'Gilui Me'ein Tzei. V'hi mishum eize siva v'tam. And if there'll be a rotzoi in a thing which is only a gilui from the Eibishter, then that'll have some, what you might call, explicable reason and explanation why it's like that. In other words, that since we're not talking about atzmas, we're talking about a ha'ora v'gilui min ha'atzmas, therefore, if there'll be a certain, what you might call, tnua, or movement, or inyan, in that, which in this particular case we call it rotzoi, then it must be possible in some way to give a tam and a sibah. A sibah means like a cause, not in the normal sense of cause and effect, and tam means like an understandable reason, almost a reason which is a piseichel. Ukiyadua, the sibas harotzoi b'ha'oyer. If we take the light which goes off from the Eibishter, which we call oyer, then he said it's well known that in oyer there's a rotzoi, and the rotzoi lamaila is dafki in oyer. So he said that the sibas harotzoi b'ha'oyer uliyei shehu ha'ora lavad v'chol ha'ora nimsheches el mekoiro lehikolel bimkoiro lafi shehi ha'ora v'lo yetem hi margeshes mekoiro lochein hi bechinas rotzoi lehikolel or lehikolel in the mocker. So now here we made up with a very fascinating concept that's brought down in various places in Drush Exodus. We're all familiar with the fact that the majority of inyonim b'cholo ilames, afilu the ilames aki elyonim, and afilu in the matter was koydem atzimtum arishoin, all of them are in what we call oyer, avoloi b'ha'atzmes. And the atzmes hamoya, when he's the source of the light, he's not under discussion, beroiv hamakoimes. Even where we talk about atzmas, oyer ein seif, and we don't mean mamish the atzmas, no, we mean the atzmas of the oyer. In other words, how the oyer is closer to the etim than it is in further hamshochis that it can undergo. But b'chol hamakoimes, we talk about oyer ein seif, or oyer v'keili and oyrois v'losher rabim, then we mean things which are only a reflection or luminescence, bilvad. They're not the etzim at all. It's well known that oyer, if we take oyer from a candle or oyer from a light of this sort, then the oyer is only an intangible luminescence that has no essential mamoshes or no essential metzias in its own self. And its whole union is only Giluya HaMo'er. It's only to be Megala the Mo'er. And therefore it tells us in Yonim about the Mo'er. It doesn't necessarily tell us everything about the Mo'er, but it tells us certain Yonim, and its union is to be Megala the Mo'er. And therefore, being as it is only a Ha'ora, then it doesn't in any way detract from the Mo'er, and it doesn't in any way add to the moya. That means to say, it doesn't matter to the atzmus if the oyer is meya or the oyer is not meya, because the oyer is only a luminescence, it's only a ha'ora, it doesn't affect in any way the atzmus. How can we say that it does matter to the atzmus? We can say mitzad richoinoi, that since the Eibishter was megala arotzim, that he wants that the oyer should be nimcha, then in that respect we can say, kaviyoho, also not fully, but we can say that it's important to the Moyer that the oyer be meir, because that's what he wanted. Why he wanted that, we also don't know. Well, Ba'al that he wanted that, we know. And in that regard, it can have some reference to the Atman. But the etzim ha'ora itself, it doesn't add or subtract klal to the Moyer. And that's what we mean, that it's only a a ha'ora, that's from the word ha'ora, meaning reflection or luminescence, Dover she'ein boi mamish. Amamela, said the Rebbe, wherever you've got a ha'ora, you've got a shoyrosh and mokir from whence that ha'ora was nimcha. It didn't come from nowhere, it came from a ma'or. It came from, and in our case, it came from the Atzmos. It came from the Atzmos of the Eibishter. And then the oil undergoes different gradations, and it can also undergo tzimtzumim, because it's only a luminescent. It can undergo tzimtzumim, which the Atzmos, of course, can undergo tzimtzumim. And therefore there can be different gradatory revelations of the oil. So when we talk about rotzoi l'mayla, then we say that after the oil was nimshach from Hashem and from His etzem, and He gave forth the oil, then we say there occurs a rotzoi in the oil, that the oil, as it were, wants to go back and be nichlal like it was prior to its his galus. It wants to go back and be nichlal in the moel. Now, to a certain extent, we find that also by the neshama. But that's not so much mitzad the inyan from ha'ora. There, it's a slightly different inyan. But that's what the Alter Rebbe says in Perek Yutes, that the neshama betiva wants to go back into her shoresh, even though she'll be absorbed into the shoresh and she'll lose her whole matzias like she is now. To a similar extent, the ha'ora is also that way. Because if the ha'ora will go back into the moya, then it's not going to be like it is. It's not going to be like it is now, because it's going to be niklal inside the moya. It's not going to be a oil begiloi in the cholo michutz lahamoya. So therefore, the Rebbe says here a cloud that every inyan which is only a ha'ora it's nimshach lihikol bimkoiro. Because it's only a ha'ora, v'lo ya'etzem, and it's margish makoiro, lochin b'chlias rotzei lihikol. So this is a very fascinating principle, that something which is only a ha'ora, it's only a luminescence, then the what you might call almost the teva of that luminescence is that it wants to go and be oilev nichlal back into the moya. It doesn't want to be meir michutz l'moya. It wants to go back into the state as it was before. However, there's one condition to that, or there's one factor, you might say, in that, which is important. It's not necessarily a condition, it's a factor, and that is because it feels its moya. It feels where it came from. That's why he puts in the expression that it's margeshes es makoiro. The ha'ora, is magish to moke from whence it comes, and therefore it has this rotzei to be in a margeshes makoiro. He wants to go back and be nichlal. Now we're going to see a little bit further along that we can say that there's maybe certain what you might call rewards or certain milas that the ha'ora feels by going back into its moya. But right at this point, and the fact that the Rebbe doesn't mention that here openly, even though in other places he does, well, that tends to indicate there's a desire on the part of a ha'ora to go back into its moya as long as it feels the moya, which it does. Now why do I say as long as it feels the moya, which it does? Because a ha'ora from a moya, in the way we're talking here, does feel. That's what he said. It is margish. Because the Alter Rebbe says in Shara Yichud V'Emunah, it's brought down, and the Alter Rebbe writes over there that all the created beings, all the Yesh HaGashmi, is also only a ha'ora from the Oyer Oraki. If you look over there carefully, in Perek Dalet, so Perek Gimel, and so Perek Dalet, then you see that's what the Alter Rebbe says over there. So the question is, if the Nivroim are only a ha'ora, then they should want to go back. And we see that the Nivra, Agashmi, not like that. He doesn't want to go back into his shores. On the contrary, if you don't prod him, he will just sit where he is and say, oh, let's have a good life and a good time in this Olam Hazeh Agashmi. That's a very special inyan, and that's what he spends the whole Shara Yichud in a way explaining why that's the case, and this amazing inyan of the Yesh HaGashmi. So the Yesha Gashmi is a Yochim in a cloud. He's only a Ha'orah, but nonetheless he doesn't feel a desire to go back to his Moya. But he doesn't feel the Moya. He was brought about in such a way that he makes a trick with him that he doesn't feel the Moya. Of an ordinary, in inverted commas, Ha'orah, a Ha'orah Regilo, is just a Gilui from a source of light. It's a light, it's a luminescence, and it does feel it's Moya. On the contrary, there's nothing to stop it, not feeling the Moya. And therefore, since it feels the Moya, then it wants to go back to where it came from. So we have to say, what's the debut of it? Why would a Ha'orah even want to go back into its Moya? Why would that be the case? Particularly the Davis has been Magala, the Moya. We'll see, the truth is that it can understand that Davis has got other kavanas. But just purely mitzad atzmai, the oil wants to go back to, as long as it feels it's Moya. So we can say in that two biurim, we can say in that two possible ideas, and one more mufshat and the other a little bit more easier to understand. And we can say like this, that nothing likes being what you call nothing. Everything likes to feel that it is what you might call a Matthias. Everything likes to feel and be in a state of what you might call emes of being. It doesn't like being a being which is not really a being. So a Ha'orah ain't a chanami. A Ha'orah knows that it's only a Ha'orah, it's only a luminescence, it's not really anything. But when it was in the Moya, when I say in the Moya, when it was kol in the Moya, now that expression gufa, kol in the Moya, also needs an explanation. What do we mean saying that it was kol in the Moya? It didn't have any existence, it only became our when it went away from the Moya. What do we say? It was kol in the Moya. That leads us to another concept, that there is in effect such a union as oyer kol be'ah Moya Pafadir, which is Meya Michutz La Moya. There's also oyer kol be'ah Moya. This is getting complicated. But that's what the Alter Rebbe is in Perigimo over there in Shara Yichud. If you look over there, the Alter Rebbe says that if the oyer is able to be Meya B'tei Chalal Ha'olam, he says, Kol shechein v'kal v'chema, to the singers. Kol shechein v'kal v'chema, sheyochel lahoya bimkoimai. That it can be actually our mamish inside the Moya. So that's a pele. Everybody asks, what does he mean with that? Why is it a kal v'chema, etc., etc. However, what it means is that there is a oya kol mamish inside the Moya before he actually sent it out. In other words, that even before he sent out the Ha'orah is kol in him. And over there, when it's kol in him, it's in an incomparably higher and better state. Because it's mamish together with the Moya. So therefore, it benefits from the Matthias of the Moya. And it really feels the Matthias of the Moya to be its Matthias entirely. However, when it goes out and it's Me'ir Michutz LaMoya, it feels that it's, as it were, lacking that emes of Matthias, and it's become like a nothing out there. It's a Ha'orah. It's gone away from its real home. So therefore, we have to say that Kol Ha'orah, everything which is able to be a higher form of Matthias, wants to be that. It doesn't want to be a nothing. Now, we don't mean that that's even for Yeshus. On the contrary, it won't have any Yeshus when it's inside the Moya. But it wants Matthias Amitias. Wherever there can be together of a genuine Matthias, albeit a Matthias of only being bottled in Hu Ravad Veinzu, only the Eibishter, then that's what a Ha'orah wants. Now, you can add, and in certain drushim, it's written, Befrat, particularly. And we'll see that the Rebbe hints at it here also. But he doesn't go into it in so much detail here. That we could say that to a certain extent, the Ha'ora has got a form of what you might call almost self-interestedness in that, in the sense that when it was inside the moya, it was koral in the moya, like we just pointed out, it was in a much higher madrega, and it was kilu much better for itself up there. Why should it be away from the moya? In other words, that to a certain extent, when the ha'ora wants to go back into its moya, then it's looking for its own, what you might call, in inverted commas, benefit. Not just purely in and wanting a higher materials, but wanting, as you might say, a better situation for itself. It's much better to be coral inside the moya than it is to be out there, ha'ora beli kilo klum le'atzmoi. And therefore we could say that there's a certain, almost officially, in inverted commas, self-interested trace in the ha'ora that it wants to go back into what is a better situation for itself. And those two swaras stand one alongside the other somewhat. Why does it want to go back just to be in it doesn't just want to be a nothing. It wants to go back to the emes of something, because ultimately speaking, that is better for itself. Yeah? And therefore, we can say that the union of a ha'ora wanting to be nimshak to a moya is connected with the circles of every Indian, no matter what it is. If it can be in a better and higher state, then it's got the privilege to want that. Why shouldn't a thing, no matter what it is, if it can be in a better and higher state, then, as it were, that's a justifiably understandable desire that it should want that. Apart from the fact that the etzem svara tends to indicate that the moya draws back, or like we saw here, that the ha'ora almost mitzad atzmei wants to go back. The very fact that you use the word margeshes, and you say it feels the moya, that tends to indicate that there's some, it's not just purely an automatic thing, but there's some inyan here that's felt in the earth. Therefore, if the earth feels it, then feeling means that you're aiming towards something. You're trying to, as it were, gain a certain fulfillment, and therefore we use the word margish, to feel. So therefore, the two inyanim border one on the other, even though in the hafshota, in the more abstractity of the matter, we can differentiate delicately between them, as we just did. In other words, we say the first Indian is that every Indian looks and strives to return to a more immediate form of Metzius rather than to be ayin be'etzem minyonim. So there was the Rebbe, since it's margeshes makoiro, and as we said, that's not necessarily a negative thing. On the contrary, that comes to differentiate, as we said, from the yesh hagashmi, which is also a ha'ora, but he doesn't feel he's makoiro, therefore he doesn't have the rotzei to go back. And to cause him to have a rotzei to go back, you've got to work hard. And that's another story, as we'll see. And now, it says, ubefrat. Now the word befrat means, and particularly. Now the word befrat, in a context of this nature, means, and particularly. That means to say that, like, I'm adding a new point now, but it fits in and it's understood from what was said before. So that's what the word befrat means. So here we're moving into what I just said, that it's got a certain interest, not that just be'etzem, something which is only a horror, wants to be goes back to a more immediate union of what Metzius is. But there it's more like the idea of being drawn to emes existence rather than apach of saying. But here says the Rebbe, befrat, shahara azois, kemo shehi bim koiro, hi b'madrege nailis harbe ba'en aroi, kemo shu achacha piyit kale. she's on a much higher madrega legabi herself. And that's the kol came with Kal V'Chaim, what the Alter Rebbe used of them, Perikimo, and Shara Yichod, that legabi her Matzias, it's Kal V'Chaim, that she's an oyer over there, on a much higher madrega, habe be'en aroi, kemoishu achacha bis galas. Ula zois, even Pinus Roche, v'tshuka, li kolobim, oh, Emma, said the Rebbe, she's got to a certain extent, the ha'ora has a certain self-interest, but that's the second svara that we said, that since she's on a much greater madrega, and that's a thing like Gabi her, so it's not just purely the immediate scene of Matthias, no, it's a feeling, a benefit, and Mila, therefore, everything tends to want to go back to where it's on a higher madrega than where it is. In other words, where it'll be benefiting from a greater situation for its own self than where it is here. But, as we said, the Lashon is that that's a befrat, that's in particular. Well, that tends to add somewhat to what we said before, which means that the earlier understanding of the matter has to somehow or another stand in its own right, believe this whole union of the tremendous Maila, its own madrega, that it will feel when it's been koiroi. That's what we said, that every inyan which is headed on Metzias strives for Matzia. Ulazay, who beginners Rotzai, V'chuka, I'm sorry, yep, where are we? Yeah, L'Yikol Bim Koira. V'gam, says that if there's a further reason why it is that the oyer has to have in it, or does have in itself, a union of rotzai. And he will see this is almost like a tam gimel, this is almost like a third in it. V'gam yeshiba el rotzai mitzad islabshus ha'oyer be'akli לפי שאינה בערך הכלי וכידוע דקלים ואוירויס הן הפוכים זה מזה לזויס אחרי שהאויר מיה בהכלי הרי הוא חויזה ומסתלי בפינוס רוצוי וכמה שכוסו כל זה במוקים אחר, which went on in the famous Samech Samech Vav, which was the year before this in Shuas, and the Hemshech over there, the Rebbe writes about this particular inyan at great length over there. And then he says, so what does he mean by that third thing? That since oil is in the kli, and oil of a kli are hafochim zeh mizeh, and therefore the oil has to be in a state of rotzoi in order that it should be able to hold out in the kli. That seems to be almost having a cake and eat it too. That's like laughing. But the whole thing, if the earth is rotzai, then it's not in the kli. And we say no, dafki, because the earth is in the kli, therefore it's in a state of rotzai. So the answer is that since the oil and the kli are two inyonim kol kach hafuchim tzemizeh, in other words, that the earth is giloi hamoya, and therefore the earth says, like we said, his inyan is to be magala demoya, and therefore the earth says, Einoid milvate, the earth always tells the Emitius abitul, and the inyan from Kli is Metzias, the whole inyan from Kli is Hergesha Metzias, and you read of Adar Metzias into the inyan of Yesh, that's what a Keli is, and therefore the earth and the Keli can't possibly get together. Yet nonetheless we say no, we have to have a yichud oyeres v'ha a kelim. So the Rebbe said you never get it. There's never such a thing as yichud oyeres v'ha kelim in a way that it's just you put down the oil and the oil goes into the kelim and then everybody says, oh, now I got oyeres and I got kelim and let's go further. Well, the oyeres and the kelim are always in a state of unrest, one with the other. And how is it that the oil is able to stay in the kli as long as you let it out every now and then? As long as you give the oil the opportunity, as it were, how do you call it, move and jump from the kli every now and then. I don't know how we can say every second or every moment. He was able to move from the kli. and then come back, then the oil will stay, as it were, in the Kli. But if the oil was to be committed to be in the Kli the whole time, then the oil say, can't do that. It's not able to do that. And so the Rebbe said that's another reason why there's a rotze in the oil, because we know that it would be impossible for the oil, in inverted commas, to sit in the keli. And therefore we have to allow the oil to feel its moya in such a way that it'll always be moving back, and it'll go back into the kli. It'll be moving back and going back, moving back and going back. Well, that's in from rotze v'shoiv, and that's the only way we can talk about yichud oiros v'ha. Yichud oiros v'ha. And the truth of the matter is, to a certain extent, that's even with the neshama in the gur. That's why there's certain minutes of the day when you get really the what's really going on, and there's other minutes where you tend to go down a bit more into this world, just accept it, and say, well, the whole time you're, as it were, you're moving with different tnuas in yourself. Well, those moments when you say, I'm just, going out, I'm going to devote myself, and I'm just going to be an Elohim, well, that's the, as it were, I mean, then that's like as it were the oil going between the rotze, or the neshama rather. Then when you sort of, then the neshama tends to have more a state of hishashvis in the kli. But kamuvin is that both the rotze and the shoiv are eventually both supposed to be al pitera b'tafsas. That the rotze is al pitera until the shoiv. But the two tnuas indicate that unrest. And so it is in Kol HaMadreges Ad Oilam HaKi Ad Ach, that the oil never actually rests in the Kli. And the Eibishter had to make Kaviyochel. He had to make him, and he made it, because he saw that was the way to achieve what he wanted in this whole area, that the oilos have the right to, as it were, all the time feel the desire to go back, and then they undergo a realization that they can't go back into the Kli, and that's the whole time. They go to inter-swapping and interchanging in their whole relation to the Kli, and that's how they stay in the Kli. So therefore we have to give them the right every now and then to move out of the Kli. And that's the way it is that we get Yichud HaEretz V'Yah HaKeilim. So you might say, if that's the case, where does it get there? Where does it get there? To show you, how does it come back into the Kli? If you let it go out, I'm going to try to let me out. Who says I'm coming? Who says I'm going to come back? So we'll still be able to see about that shortly. In another few lines, there's kind of hint at that also. We're going to see there's a famous principle that so the oil realizes that it should really be in the Kli. And that's what causes it to have a shoiv, and it senses a tremendous mila that is in the Kli. And it senses that the emissary, what you might call purpose of Hashem, is in the Kli, so therefore it decides it's going to go into the Kli. And then it asks itself to show back the other way, Im Kain, how does it get a rotze again? If it realizes that the emissary kavanah is in the Kli, yeah, and so that's where it's really supposed to be. And how does it get another rotze? Yeah, so it's written that the oil is such a rotze can be. It's in Yoneh, no matter how much he's makabel on himself shoiv, he always feels the reshima of that rotze, and that wakes up in him again the inyan from the rotze, and the Eibishter Kaviyach allows that to happen, because that's part of the kavanah. The skufa is part of the kavanah. In other words, that the emes kavanah is the shoiv. That's the emes kavanah. Or in order that the shoiv should be amiti, it should have chayas, the Eibishter permits the earth to have the inyan from rotze, and so therefore it's all the time going rotze v'shoiv.
When you say kalim here, does it mean the mahor or the word?
No. I don't know what's wrong with you today, myself. I mean, everybody knows what kalim means. I mean, I don't know if they do, but I mean, they got some idea. Kalim is the kalim in Atzilus, the kli which is makabel the oil. Atzmus is something we're going to start talking about the objects now. That we wouldn't have the whole Indian. Say the Ishtaushalis, we wouldn't have the whole Indian of levels going one to the other. If it weren't for the Indian, for Rotzeva, for sure, if it weren't for that Indian, and particularly if it weren't for the Rotzeva, then there wouldn't be the ability of the oil would never be able to just sit and be mishashiv in a kli. It can't do it, it's too much limitation, too much agbola. And so therefore the Eibush allows the oil to continuously have the rotzoi, and then it changes its mind kaviyachol. The oil comes back into the kli, and then it gets a certain trace of that previous rotzoi, and it goes back into it again. And it's how they call his mind in that state of rotzoi shoiv, and belizeh you couldn't have your whole, we call Yeridas Oilamas, Oilas B'tei HaKeilim, Achilas, and then Bria, all those, and each Oilam with Esesphiras, with his Kli, and the herb, it wouldn't be possible, wouldn't be shy. If not the whole concept of Roteva Vashoy. And Mamira said that's a third time why the Uyer, the Haora, has a Roteva. They should be able to be Mischaber with the Kli. In other words, that's a chesed elium, what the Eibishter does, the whole of his Shtaushebeth, and with the that he gives it the right to feel, even though ultimately he wants it to be in the Keilim.
I just had a question. Seemingly from what we just read from the last few sentences, seemingly from what we just read from the last few sentences in the Maimer, it seems that the whole Inyan of Rotza is so to speak the derech mamela, like it just happens. So why do we say that before that you need to do Yigiyah to do Rotza? I mean, seemingly you only need to do Yigiyah to do the Shuk, because the whole nature of the Ur is to so to speak go up.
Yeah, I agree with you that what you're trying to tie is that the Indian from Rotza is like an Indian TV.
Right, that's exactly
right. I agree with you. And it's a very good point what you say. And sometimes we use the expression in this Teva Aliyah Sheba Oyer. We said that the Oyer is in its in of Teva Aliyah. And that's connected with this whole idea of Ha'ora, wanting as a word to go back. It's connected with and that's a whole difference between Rotza V'Shoyiv in a Vedas Adar. The Indian from Rotza is a Geshmacha thing. It's a thing that once you explain to a mensch about what are the stakes, he would want to go tell it, because why wouldn't he? That's almost a natural thing in a neshama like a Yidah that would want to have a tremendous aliyah and dveikus in eloquence. That's an expectable thing. But to come down and do Yisachar in some ways almost like the opposite of what that implies, and to come down into the world and mamish be mekayim Torah mitzvahs in the world, that's heipach hateva. Doesn't even heipach hateva. That's even shoy. And that's what we saw before. In order to get to that, you have to give away all your own ideas. You've got to be a Evan. That's how you do it. You've got to give away even your ideas, which are mitzad neshama. Like you said, it's a natural thing that the neshama wants to go up. Even that you've got to be prepared to give away. And so that's the whole kvetch. This primer is this whole concept of the shoy. And we're going to see as we go along, that I was going to develop on this massively towards the end of the Maimah, but the whole Tachlis is in Emerson the Shoy. That's what the Eibishter want. But that means that you've got to be a selfless person. That's the way you give everything away, and that's why I use the expression of an Eved Dav. A Dav can Eved Poshet. Because the Eved Ne'eman, he's got to a certain extent, he's got what you might call motivations. And ultimately, Shoiv doesn't ask for any motivation. Ultimately, even Shoiv is, that's what he wants, that's where it's got to be. I remember once, I think I told you guys that once my Farang was from Nachum Goldschmidt, always saw him. He was very amazing, had these amazing sort of definitional abilities, to define things. And once my Farang was, there was a Bisnagdish row, was sitting there. And he was a sharp cookie. He understood So he asked Rav Nochem something about, what's going to be with me? The way you guys, the way you're talking, that we don't exist. Or so Rav Nochem said to him, he said the whole union of Dira B'Taktoinim is that he's not talking to you at all. He's just using you like as almost like a screwdriver to draw that you're going to make him deal with something, and that's negative your teva hanishama almost, and that's what you got to do. That's what he's not talking to you at all. That's what he said to this guy. Redt nicht mit dir im Ganzen. Redt nur mit Atzme. Sagt was will. He says what he wants. He doesn't talk to you at all. So the guy was, completely, he'd never heard this type of thing before. So he said in Yiddish, it was the reshta, where do you have some change, when you pay something, you get back a bit of change. It's a very intelligent, very amazingly intelligent question. He said, we don't have anything for ourselves, we're just nothing. It's worse than, it's an old saying in Yiddish, we're the reshta. That means, where do we get something from this? What's our payment? What's the sort of pitch line? Can you understand the question? That's what he said to Rav Nochem. I was very impressed by the question, because that's a sign that he understood the matter very, very well. He said, what is the, what's the reshta? So Rav Nochem said, Ein Lachanami. He said, if you put everything in his hands, then he'll look after you. He'll know what you're going to have and what you. In other words, what you'll need to have, he'll give you. What you don't need to dry your cup anyway. And he said, since you give yourself completely into his hands, he'll look after you. Not bad, eh?
They're both sharp.
Huh?
I said they're both sharp.
Shevs?
They're both sharp.
Yeah.
Rabbi, what's the difference between Hasagas of Shlila and Yediyas of Flaw?
Well, we spoke about that in the Shurim. And Hasagas of Shlila is just the very fact that I negate things of the Olamas from the Eibishter. I don't think how great he is in the Olamas, but I think how far he is away from the Olamas. And the Afloa is how far is he away? How great is that complete distance of his? So we say that if you're really trained in Yediyas Hashlila, you can come to appreciate just how far, you can get some knowledge of that action, Afloa. Only on certain levels. The immediate Afloa, nobody will ever know. You can come to appreciate it. We heard that in the second Maimonides, in the Maimonides in Shabbos Tshuva. They ever said that those who are Ishik, Davki, Nasoga, Selakus, Davki, they're the only ones who know how much they don't understand. Right. Good. Okay, guys. This is already becoming, what they call it, this is becoming real fitness for that.